Hello and welcome back to Read Becca for my chatty catch up on everything that I read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for about the current week. And this is going to be a weird week in review because I don't really read a ton of horror, and this week is going to be all about horror. I'm not against the horror genre whatsoever. I certainly read horror more than certain other genres, like romance. I really had no exposure to romance in my earlier life. Horror, I've certainly read like Frank Peretti, which is kind of the Stephen King of the Christian authorship world. I dabbled with King himself in college once I finally realized, oh hey, I can go like check out any books I want. That was one of the things I tried from the library. So I have read horror, and I don't really look to horror for things that are just gruesome and gross for grossness sake. I look to it for psychological horror and thrillers. I look for things that have an actual message and story behind what they're doing, and the horror is serving a purpose to kind of wrong foot the reader. So this is weird for me though, because I definitely have gotten much more into horror the past couple years, specifically in lockdown, like quite a lot of people. I turned to things like Squid Game and watched that. I watched all of the Mike Flanagan series that came out around then, and we'll talk about that later with the shows, I guess. But I certainly watched a lot more horror, but I haven't explored into reading much horror, maybe until last year, and I dabbled a little bit, but not nearly as much as I have here. I definitely pushed limits for myself, or what I thought were limits, and have not yet hit a wall. As I said, I don't read things for gruesomeness sake, so I skim over a little bit in some of these things that have gotten a little too gross for me, but mostly I've really enjoyed what I've been reading. So let's dive into the books. We'll start with one that's kind of a known quantity for me. This is Demon Haunted by Ashe Armstrong. This is the second book in the Grimlock Demon Hunter series. So this is the second in a series, obviously, and I wanted to return to reread this because it's my favorite in the series. And this is, as I said, it's Grimlock Demon Hunter is the series. So we're following an orc for Orktober, who is a demon hunter. He travels around kind of showing up in villages as they have posted a need for a demon hunter because they're beset by possessions or a demon who's haunting them. But in this case, he is leaving a previous village with someone else who he has kind of rescued from that village where he stopped a haunting. And in this case, they're kind of going back to his homestead. They're on their way to, what is it, a cozy vibes mundane story. So there are those elements here, and that's kind of why I love it. But it also has a very strong balance of the horror, because this is a weird Western, which is a subgenre of fantasy that combines Western, paranormal horror, and fantasy. This is very traditional fantasy, obviously. We've got sort of the traditional fantasy races set in a Western world with these very strong paranormal haunting elements. So here, they're traveling to his homestead, and along the way they stop in the village of Perfection. Naturally, it does not live up to the name because, of course, in this series, everyone in power tends to turn out to be really evil and often have some sort of bargain with demons. And that's the case here. So Grimlock is kind of immediately captured. We find out there is a demon involved, and things go from there. But there are so many of these cozy elements right alongside things like human sacrifice coming up. Yet it doesn't go to really gruesome, graphic places for the most part, so I don't have trouble reading this series. This particular book, I think, doesn't engage much with like nuanced, heavy real-world topics, but they are present in the background, and the other books in the series do. There are things like the fact that Grimlock is an orc, and that is a very oppressed and hated race in this world, engaging with those traditional fantasy tropes of orcs being kind of perceived as less than and evil. And he clearly is not. He has such a good heart, and he's always there to help people, even when they are very, very cruel to him. So this one has that present in the background, but it's not super discussed as far as a real world topic. So I think for this one, the balance is really great because of that, because it sticks to keeping these kind of comforting elements alongside the dark elements. So I just really enjoyed the reread of this. I don't know that I have a ton more to say other than, yeah, I'm super excited to have gotten back to the series, and I actually picked up the physical book because I just had it on ebook. So now I have the complete set in physical. So I can maybe consider doing a full series reread in the future. Then I picked up a middle grade horror. This is Dark Waters by Katherine Arden. This is the third in a seasonal quartet of, as I said, middle grade horror. And we are following kind of a trio, Ollie, Brian, and Coco, who are friends that in the first book, in fall, it goes fall, winter, spring, and then summer is the finale. In the first book, they encountered a school field trip to a farm with a run into this person who's strange and magical that they know only as the Smiling Man. And in each of the seasonal quartet, he has set up some very magical, mildly unsettling things that happen to them as almost a game that he's playing with them. He likes riddles, he likes to be tricksy, and I like that aspect of this. So he's sort of the big bad, but then each of the books seems to have more of a theme. So in this spring novel, they are going with their parents on a boat cruise at Lake Champlain to see Champ, who is basically Lake Champlain's Nessie. It's a cryptid. And along the way, suddenly things sort of go wrong. And I don't know how much I want to say more than that, but an island, a mysterious island that shouldn't be there, appears. So naturally it's falling into one of these Smiling Man traps. So what I loved about this is that Arden really always delivers on atmosphere. She is a master of atmospheric writing, and that is so present here. It's so creepy. This also went back to a plotting element, I would say, or a framing element that I loved from the first book, and that is sort of an epistolary style writing, because we are getting snippets of a captain's log from a previous ship that had sunk in the lake. So the first book has a letter writing of like historical letters that are discovered that are being read throughout the story, and that made the first book my very favorite. So this one, I really liked having that element kind of come back. It wasn't as prominent though, so I don't know that it added as much as I would have liked. What I didn't love about this one is that it feels very abrupt, and that does kind of serve a purpose, but it just sort of ended. And so that leads me into my next read, because I picked up the fourth book, Empty Smiles, also by Katherine Arden. So this is the summer book. We're in a sweltering August here, and at the beginning of this novel, we have a boy who has been missing for a couple weeks, who's not known to this previous stories or anything. He appears with our main characters from the previous book, being out at the river, enjoying cooling off on a hot day, and so they hear him talking about things that lead them to believe he has been somehow in with the Smiling Man, and so they're trying to get information from him, because to that abrupt ending from the previous book, after that scene, this jumps back 3 months prior to where our previous book left off, and it talks us through, well, what was the fallout of that previous book. And so this one does go to a creepy carnival, as you can see from the cover. So the creepy carnival, the carnies, and the clowns who don't speak but are ever smiling, very ominous, again, really atmospheric writing, are ever present but can't be engaged, I guess, and they're sort of the ones that are doing most of the terrible stuff. Meanwhile, the Smiling Man is kind of trying to get in the good graces of our main characters. What I loved about this particular entry, so throughout the previous entries, the kids were not communicating to their parents what had gone on for pretty good reasons. I hate that trope in middle grade where the kids and the parents don't talk and they have kind of unhealthy relationships. Like, I feel like we should be depicting healthy parent-child relationships in books that are intended for kids for the most part, unless we're actually critiquing it and like trying to show bad relationships. So anyway, that's just like a personal bothersome element to middle grade for me sometimes. So this, we finally do get to the conversation of the parents going, yeah, like our kids really haven't been the same or behaving normally for a while since this thing in like a couple months ago, you know, like, well, what's going on with them? So the parents are starting to get clued in and ask questions and talk to each other about things. And the kids finally do have that realization of like, well, maybe we should just talk to our parents. And they do have that conversation. I think for me, it's very impactful that when the kids do finally talk to their parents, the parents, even if they don't believe the magical aspect, they say, you know, we believe what you're telling us, and we're going to support you through this, whatever that is, you know. So they get behind the kids in supporting them with what they're claiming has happened, with knowing there's something clearly wrong that they need help with. So I really like when that happens in middle grade as well. And again, I like depictions of healthy parent-child relationships to be in middle grade. So I think that was done really well here. So as far as the story, unfortunately, it is very abrupt ending as well. And as this is the finale, I didn't really love that. So I think, unfortunately, that disappointed me, because we are going through, to what I said earlier, the Smiling Man likes to play games with these kids. And so they have been sort of going through the steps of completing this, puzzle game that he has set out for them. And I was thinking they were just starting along the way and like getting through the first little bits of the puzzle. And it was just sort of like, okay, they're done. Like, it caught me off guard, not least of which because all of these books have the other books' excerpts at the end. So it looked like there was about 50 pages left of this, and there were not. It just ended. I do like that they worked through things in a cohesive, like in a group setting rather than anyone individually. And that is a major part of how things have to be solved, is that them coming together is a prominent element, and helping and supporting each other rather than individually having to be the hero and save one another. So I have liked that throughout the series. So I think the messages and themes are really wonderful here. I think that the atmosphere is obviously a strength of Katherine Arden's writing. So I've really enjoyed all of these books. These last two were probably like only 3 to 3.5 stars. But they certainly built to a bigger, wonderful narrative that I've enjoyed this whole series. The first book, however, is still by far and away my very favorite. So with that, I have actually finished all of Katherine Arden's backlist now. I've read her Winter Night trilogy and now this quartet. So I'm really anticipating whatever she comes out with next, because I've loved all her work. Then I read Camp Damascus by Dr. Chuck Tingle. Tingle is the author of hundreds of gay erotica, usually with pounded in the butt somewhere in the title, and a few satires as well. This was not anything that I expected whatsoever. And I think, too, what I was saying earlier, horror kind of works by catching the reader a little bit unfooted. This definitely did that. I bounced very hard off this book immediately at the beginning, but not for the horror elements. For the religious elements, because this is such a true, believable account of someone who has been fully invested in what seems like a evangelical religious sect. This is separated from reality, though, in that Tingle has written this particular church as having a prophet, having their own tenets. So he does kind of do a good job in moving it one remove away from anything real, making it just slightly a bit more culty. But, so as far as the plot here, we are, ostensibly told this is a gay conversion camp story. This church is running a 100% effective gay conversion camp. At the beginning, we don't get any of that. We're just following Rose. Rose Darling is out with friends, and she is in her head very, very much. And that was what I bounced off, is her going through, what is the right thing to do? What does God want from me? She's with these friends, and some of them are Christian, some are not. Is she hurting her witness with every single move she makes? Is she reaching the people she needs to reach? Should she just be having fun, or should she be trying to connect with someone? And she's so hyper analytical about every single thing that it's really hard to read, because it's so real. It's so true to my own experience as someone who did grow up evangelical and has since deconstructed. And yeah, it was very difficult, and that was why I bounced off it at the beginning. Before this, I really wouldn't have said I was someone who had a lot of trauma or triggers with reading stuff like this, but yeah, it was definitely hard to read, and because it was so realistic. So she's out swimming and sees something that just doesn't seem like it could be real, and dismisses it, and it's unsettling, but she just kind of moves along. And then that night at dinner, she throws up a bunch of bugs. So that's on the cover. And there isn't a big bug element. That is not the ongoing horror aspect. But it is, again, continues to be so hard to read. This is still within the first chapter and the first little bit, so I'm not going to go much further than that with plot here until we get to spoilers. But her parents' response is very much just, oh, well, don't worry about it for now. We'll see if it works itself out. Just trust God. Very dismissive and very realistic. A lot of the accounts in her interactions with her parents were so unsettling, because I've had almost exact interactions like that with my own, and it was very, very hard to read through. So I think that's mostly all I would say about plot. This does deliver on such a believable and connectable character, though, that's the aspect that carries this through entirely. You really get behind her and attach with what she's going through, because the horror here is not really the gay element, even though that's what's being, pushed in the marketing. This is a horror story about deconversion and deconstruction of your faith. And so we're so much in her head as she's struggling and grappling through recognizing things that are suspicious and not quite right, and beginning to question. And yeah, it really aligns with my experience. She's also such a great character because she is autistic. She's very questioning and curious and likes facts a lot. She is explicitly autistic on page, that's stated about her, and very clear elements of her autism are spelled out on page. Things like the facts. She recalls facts to comfort herself. She keeps note cards for socialization so she can keep a conversation going. She actively stims at times, and kind of hearing her parents' negative view of that. They're wanting her to be, quote, normal, and feeling like she has to fit into the correct box for the type of person that will fit in is very hard to read. And that does really align with the gay elements as well, and the negative view of that through this church. So the gay element, though, isn't a huge thing. It's not a big part of this. It does exist, but the biggest element is her introspection and processing through this as she's questioning and seeing, uncovering reality that's been right in front of her all along. So I love her as a character. I love the depiction. I think it's very realistic of being someone inside of the church, and myself having grown up with almost her exact experience, it was very hard to read for that. So the actual writing is plain, but not in any way simplistic like I was sort of expecting, coming from Tingle's previous work. But I think it delivered very easy to process, and the introspection, the internalization of what she's doing is laid out on page so well. So I want to give you a short section of that. I've always been wise for my age, and part of that wisdom came from having a profound sense of who I was and what I liked. I understood my place in the world. I was a daughter, an American, a member of the congregation. I played soccer, and I loved brownies. I was curious and full of joy. I was excited to try new things, and I had a past, present, and very specific future laid out for me. I was committed to the Lord. Some of those things are still true, of course, but as more and more of my characteristics fall into question, I find myself testing the relevance of them all. What happens when every identity marker slips away? Do you disappear? I glance down at my hands as they grip the steering wheel, double-checking that the appendages haven't faded into mist. Still here. So yeah, that just really tugs at my heartstrings of someone who is genuinely grappling with what was their reality falling away, and recognizing with difficulty that everything they thought was real about their world and who they were is not. So I think that's everything I would say about this, other than I did really enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to whatever Tingle puts out next. I think they have already announced another, horror book. I believe it's called Bury Your Gays, so another somewhat gay horror book. So I will be definitely checking it out. So I do want to talk major spoilers, though, because I know a lot of people are really curious about this, or want to know what I think about the major spoiler aspects. But many people don't actually want to read this, or it's too far horror for them. So for me, actually, before I get to spoilers, I will say I don't do a lot of gross stuff, as I talked about. Nothing gross for grossness sake. There is definitely some unsettling imagery. As I said kind of earlier, the bug stuff does not continue on a whole ton, so that is brief. There are some really gruesome images through this. A couple of times, I would say 2 to 3 times, very gruesome. But for the most part, anything that is strongly graphic is in the vein of like 1 to 2 lines. So nothing is drawn out. Nothing really gets into nitty-gritty detail over and over. The unsettling stuff is quite prominent, so I will say that. But I'm at that point where, to what I was saying earlier in the video, I don't know if I'm just desensitized because I have been reading a lot more horror and feeling more comfortable with it, or if these things are really, I am so a wimp, these things are not that bad. I feel like this was definitely nowhere near as bad or graphic as I was expecting in terms of the gory content. Didn't really feel very gory at all. So onward to the major spoilers. Okay, so major massive spoilers are, as I said, this is not a gay conversion camp story. This is about deconstruction, and this really barely even takes place at a camp. Like, almost not at all, because Rose has already been to the camp and she does not know it when we start this book. So her parents have been keeping all of this from her, and she has no memory. As it turns out, the 100% success rate is because they're literally using demon possession with the campers. So somehow they have figured out a scientific and technological method of tethering demons full on with polo shirts and name tags as staff to possess the kids. And it works by way of conditioning. For most people, they don't question and push back as soon as they start seeing something unreal and unsettling. Anytime they have even the slightest urge, they just back away. They closet themselves internally more and more. And so through this story, we are seeing that she's not a person who responds to that conditioning well at all. So even though things initially appear unreal, even though they're in response to kind of innocuous stuff where she's just being drawn to a girl she's by. She's not particularly attractive. She's not having any, lewd thoughts or anything. It's just minor details about her that are leaning that way. And so usually that will stop things in their tracks, and people just become very closeted and internally even to themselves. And here she doesn't stop. She just keeps questioning, and she just keeps going and validating the reality that the things she thought were very unsettling and unreal are actually there and are actually showing up. And she's increasingly remembering what has happened to her and having recall of how she felt before. And that's triggering even more and more. And yeah, so that concept is really interesting. I think it was an interesting book for me because this is exactly the kind of book I would have read when I was younger. Everything about this could totally fit as a Frank Peretti book. He writes horror that predominantly has demons as the evil horror element. That's exactly what this is. The only difference, this could be a Christian book except for the fact that the framing on who is doing wrong and who is right is swapped. So you could reframe the same exact book and I think it would totally fit as a Christian horror book. So that was really weird to read through this feeling like, yeah, this is so much like things I've read before. And the aspects that it's trying to get across are similar to things I've read before in Christian horror, but it is reframing and showing the wrongdoing. It does also have a lot of commentary about corporate Christianity and the wrongs of that, the harms of that. And how much that loses sight of and manipulates, spiritually abuses people. So spiritual and religious abuse is using the fear through the religion to manipulate or control someone. And that often opens the door to other forms of abuse. But that on its own is a serious form of abuse that's very much engaged by the church and very widely, unfortunately. And man, oh man, was that hard hitting for me. So I feel like this had a lot more from a messaging standpoint than I even expected. We do very cathartically get an ending of, the demons are a lot more concerned by the people who are doing wrong in the name of God than the gays. And I think that was the right way to end it. It feels like a very happy ending, honestly, for a horror book. It was really weird and, as I said, felt very cathartic. So everything about this was not the book I expected, but I loved it more than I thought. It wasn't quite perfect, certainly. It's definitely a debut. But man, oh man, was this hard hitting, and for such a short book, like this packed a punch for me. It was really difficult coming from such a similar background, reading a really similar character to my own experiences, and seeing it play out in such a believable way, other than the demons, obviously. It was really, really hard and really, really good. So I wound up feeling very glad I did actually go ahead and read this, because I was kind of on the bubble whether or not I wanted to. Moving on from spoilers from the stuff I read, I am currently in progress on several things as always, but I lost the audio of All Creatures Great and Small about halfway through. So I picked up on audio Leech by Hiron and Ennes and wanted to hybrid read it, so I went and got the print book as well. And that one is horror as well. I also picked up real horror, American Idolatry by Andrew L. Whitehead, about white Christian nationalism. And I am still in progress on Distant Gardens and Empress of Forever. So I'm reading lots of things as always. Yeah, so I'm hoping to finish the horror before the end of the month, and we will see though, because I only have a couple days left. So onward to other lifey stuff. Watching things. Again, it's going to be a very horror-centric day, so I'm going to talk horror again. I finished The Fall of the House of Usher by Mike Flanagan. So Flanagan is one of those people I mentioned up front who I got very, very into over the lockdown. He released a couple of Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, as well as Midnight Mass. And I thought I hated horror or didn't really love horror and wasn't really interested until those really were what got me into like, oh well, maybe I could really like horror, because they are much more atmospheric, much more about psychological storytelling, and for the most part they have unsettling elements, but only a handful of actually gruesome depictions on the screen. So very minimal gore. And I do really like that. So I liked, but maybe didn't love Haunting of Hill House. I really loved Bly Manor. I'm one of those people who doesn't actually like Turn of the Screw, and very controversial here on BookTube. But I thought it was like miles above Turn of the Screw as an adaptation. It's very loose to the original story, but the framing, like the bullet points are still clearly there. Midnight Mass is probably one of my favorite shows ever, and weird, it's again about religion, and it's very critical of religion. So I think you'll find a theme there that I engage with that, and things that are looking at that through a critical lens. So I love the storytelling there. Midnight Mass has some of the best cinematography. The performances are great, and that's kind of one of the things throughout his shows. So Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, and now Fall of the House of Usher have all played with a majority of the same cast members and drawn them back. So they're not playing, like, there's no carryover or anything between their characters or the storytelling, but they've been, shuffled around in these series. Midnight Mass, I think, was not in any way related to those others, like that series of adaptations. So Midnight Mass, though, is just stellar from the performances. I think every single person in the cast did a great job. So Fall of the House of Usher is connected back to the other sort of series of adaptations. However, it's really, really loose on adaptation. By pure chance, or not really by chance, by luck of T. Kingfisher having written and released What Moves the Dead, I had also recently reread Fall of the House of Usher, because What Moves the Dead is a retelling. So Fall of the House of Usher is a very slight story. There's not a lot of meat there to it. And part of the reason that Kingfisher wrote What Moves the Dead is because it's so not fleshed out that she wanted to flesh out the story. And so I like What Moves the Dead better than the original. So I actually should say, I'm not going to really talk massively about plot here. I'm going to talk more about framing, so no spoilers regarding Fall of the House of Usher, the adaptation. So what is so smart about this is that it doesn't try to adapt the actual story, Fall of the House of Usher. It uses it as a framing narrative, because the story of Fall of the House of Usher is Roderick Usher has called his old friend back to his family house that's crumbling now. Roderick and his sister are still there, and something is clearly wrong with one or both of them. So their friend shows up there, and he sort of exposits about that, right? So that's what's happening here. That's the framing device here, is that Roderick Usher has called the old prosecuting attorney who has had a lifelong vendetta against him and his family because they are effectively the Sackler family dynasty. They are pushing an opioid epidemic on the populace. So that's the story here much more. This has taken that framing element of the fall of House of Usher and pulled in the real world story of the Sackler family and imagined them falling apart for supernatural, paranormal-ish reasons. So he has called this lawyer to confess. He has brought him there, and he's clearly not quite right. Things don't seem like he's paying attention fully. Things are weird in the house. It's clearly crumbling around them. But the prosecutor is there in good faith and wants to hear the real story. And so Roderick Usher tells him the story in a series of accounts, and each episode is an account of the death of one of his family members, or more in some cases, told almost in an anthology style of Poe stories or poems. So each death is a different Poe narrative. And I think that's what it did really, really well. Some of them are very recognizable. So I would tell you, do not go in looking at episode titles at all, because if you even know like what's in the universal consciousness about Poe stories, you'll be completely spoiled for how some of these end. Certain ones like Goldbug, for instance, I don't feel like there was anything that tied the actual story to that particular episode. Maybe themes, but the plotting, anything there didn't seem similar whatsoever to me. So some of them are very closely adapted, some are not. The finale contains at least 3 stories of Poe's incorporated, and it was a real tour de force. I do think this was the weakest of the Flanagan adaptations that I've seen, though. But I hate to say that. Like, as a cohesive story across the series, it was the weakest. The performances, for me, were the weakest. Carly Gugino is amazing in this, and she is very prominent throughout this. Like, her role here blows everyone out of the water. And there were a number of people who I have loved in previous series and just didn't really like their performance here. They were not great. Mark Hamill was the other real standout. So he plays the defense lawyer who has been with the Usher family for their entire lifetime, basically. And he's had to resort to very underhanded things. He is that kind of murky character who is the lawyer that also is doing not quite legal things that may include murder. But his name is Arthur Pym, interestingly. However, I don't think, again, there was any actual tie-in to the real Arthur Pym story, other than maybe as brief backstory for him. So no direct tie-in there. But Hamill was phenomenal there. And I have already heard that now Flanagan is going to be doing another adaptation. He's already been greenlighted for another Netflix series adapting The Life of Chuck by Stephen King, which I've not read before. And the cast for that is looking even better, but Hamill is definitely in the cast. Basically all of the main cast that have been carrying through all of these series are also sticking with it sounds like. But some other really major people that I'm excited to see are Harvey Guillén, who is Guillermo from What We Do in the Shadows. Tom Hiddleston, it sounds like, is going to be in it. Karen Gillan, I love her. Obviously from Doctor Who and Marvel. Yeah. Who else? I can't remember. I will put it on the screen. There was one other big name that I'm really excited about. So yeah, it has been a weird progression, I guess, of really falling in love with Mike Flanagan's stuff. I think Gerald's Game was also by him and is one I avoided watching, but I believe that movie, I think it's a movie on Netflix, I think that also has the same sort of tie-in cast as well, because I know Carla Gugino was in that too. So I'm now kind of doubting myself. I thought that was going to be too gruesome for me, but now I'm like, maybe I do want to go watch it and complete out the rest of Flanagan's history, because I've really enjoyed everything that he has made. So am I becoming a horror person? I don't know. I feel like I do get so drawn to this stuff. I think Fall of the House of Usher was great narratively in terms of him weaving together everything. So I think what he has brought to storytelling in all of these shows has been immense. Like the fact that he took this he took scraps of things. All of the short stories, the poetry is woven throughout this. Even from, I think it's the opening scene, you were opening to a funeral, and the priest is reading off Poe poetry as if it is the eulogy. So you might not even notice that there, because it does sound like that kind of high, lofty, like formal address, very mournful. And we hear snippets of just heartbreaking moments tied in with Poe's poetry. The whole vibe is just correct. The moment when Roderick Usher is reciting The Raven just blew me away. It was like the perfect scene. It's not at the complete end, but it is near the end, and it's like it ties everything together so well and gives you this heartbreaking, dark, fantastical, romantic feeling. And I think Carla Gugino's character at points through this series is like the embodiment of a Poe work, because she does have the darkly romantic vibe. It's a standout to see her on screen along with this poetic nature that is flowing through the story. So I wound up not quite loving the series as a whole, but having an appreciation for what it's doing very, very much, and thinking it's a real feat. And finding that I have maybe a love for Flanagan's work. That caught me a little off guard. I do also, by pure chance, happen to be reading Poe right now, so I was able to catch a little more than what I normally would be able to, but I'm so looking forward to coming back and rewatching this after I have finished the complete Poe, so I can spot out some of those things that I've maybe missed, you know. Many of the things that I did spot are just purely because I'm aware of things that are in general consciousness, and that was really fun. I'm looking forward to even more Easter eggs because they are everywhere just based on what I caught. So that was the main watching thing. I think I also watched Us, the Jordan Peele horror film. I had put it off for a really long time, and I didn't love it as much as Get Out. I don't feel like it had cohesion as much, and it was much more a single watch film. I don't feel like it had the depth of messaging and narrative behind it that you could really come back. It kind of falls apart if you watch it again, really, I think. I like the imagery and what it was doing. Interestingly, it also has creepy carnival aspects, not major, not prominent, but certainly creepy carnival is present in Us. I liked it. I think it was fine. It was a horror film that I was okay with. It didn't bother me too much. There was maybe a little more gore than I was really okay with. I had to kind of fast forward a couple parts. But otherwise, I don't know what other horror. I've got a couple days left before Halloween to engage with horror-y stuff, so I will probably watch some more horror movies that I've been putting off that have been on my radar, because I kind of only get to them around this season, and maybe I need to think about doing it more often or spreading them out a little bit more. So that is it for watching, and a massive ramble. This is going to be a very rambly video today, I think. So as far as my week, man, it was a heavy adulting week. I think horror was a good escape, maybe, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because I got a new dishwasher this week. I've been working on my kitchen, getting redone, and that was kind of like, I probably need to do that before I do floors, just in case something goes horribly wrong or things get scratched up. And I was very glad, because my old dishwasher was like 20 plus years old. They couldn't drain it completely, so there was water everywhere coming out of it as they were trying to remove it. It was a mess. But I had a great experience. I was very thankful that nothing went wrong otherwise, just water, a lot of water. I also got orthodontics. I'm into phase 2. So phase 1 was 45 weeks. I've had a month off, and I just started phase 2, which is pretty intense. My mouth is pretty bad. Yesterday I thought about filming, and I didn't really feel up to it, because my mouth, it looks like I had been punched in the face a little bit, because I have so much going on there right now that my lips were kind of swollen, and everything feels very torn up at the moment. So orthodontically, I'm making progress, and I'm happy with it, but it's going to be hard for a couple of days adjusting to the new Invisalign setup that I've got going on. Friday, it was so hot. It was over 80. I had to turn my AC on again, which was terrible. I was trying to gut through it, and it was just too miserable at over 80 in the house. I was like, no, I'm gonna just turn on the AC and not sweat like crazy. So everybody is out in the evening at this event, like prepared for heat, and a freezing cold blast was blowing through on the breeze. And so everybody was like chilly that hadn't brought a sweater or whatever. And lots of people in costumes that were not great cover, unfortunately. But I went out to this event, and I think these are kind of becoming a more common thing where you pay a flat fee and you get a cup. And then this was spirits in the garden specifically, so it was a lot of liquor vendors. There were tables all over our botanical garden here. So I was back at the botanical garden. You guys have seen that a lot lately. I think I've been there like 4 times in the past month, that I've shown in various vlogs, or 2 months maybe. And so I was back there and wandered around, mostly quite in the dark. They had removed the lighted stuff, so I showed you guys the lighted glass sculptures a couple weeks ago. Those have been removed, I'm assuming because of the cold. And so there wasn't that much light around, so I didn't film very much. I obviously try not to film a lot of people and stuff as well. So I only got a clip of people who were working there as performers, just wandering around, a guy on stilts as Frankenstein and a fire eater. So as we were wandering around, but it got really chilly. I was very surprised, and I was trying not to to drink a little bit, but not drink too much. And there was a lot of liquor. Not very much like mixed drinks. There were a few beers or breweries that were there. So all the vendors were obviously from local brewers and distilleries and wineries. I think the big hit was a cranberry bubbly. So it's so good because it's extremely tart, but it tastes actually like cranberry sauce, whole berry cranberry sauce, liquefied. But then with the bubbly, that takes a little edge off of the tartness. So I have already gone to the store and gotten a bottle of that and a bottle of non-bubbly to try. I think the non-bubbly is not going to be as good, but they were almost out of the bubbly kind. So I'm hoping they will restock after I've finished mine. But it is a seasonal limited, so maybe this winery will bring it back next year, because they often do their yearly seasonal stuff if they become popular. So anyway, so it was a really fun event though. I had a great time, but I was wiped the next day because it was cold, that change of weather, and the change of weather has been wild. You can tell that it's kind of dark, gloomy in here maybe, and that's because it has been just straight gloomy all week, even though it was quite hot. It's totally fall now. Our leaves have well and truly fallen, and it's very chilly. I'm going to, after I finish filming here, go out and bring my plants in, because we are supposed to drop from 80 on Friday to below freezing tonight. So yeah, it's, I guess, finally really fall. We have been waiting and waiting, and it just hasn't hit. So I'm hoping this is it and it's not going to go back up again, but who knows around here anymore. So boy oh boy, this was a really rambly one. And I hope you will comment for me below if you made it through the video. Just let me know you were here. Let me know your thoughts about horror. Are you a horror reader? Are you someone who has evolved with horror like I have? Because I do feel like it has become kind of an escape, and that seems weird and wrong to me, but yeah, it is where I'm at mentally right now with horror, and I'm looking forward to, as I said, I've picked up Leech, and so far I'm really, really enjoying that one, and then I've got another one waiting on my shelf from the library as well, if I do have time to finish some more horror, or maybe just continue it on into past spooky season. So I think that's it for me today. I do have a couple of recommendations, just 2 for this week. It's been hard to get back into giving specific recommendations because I have so much that I watch every week, and I've been having a hard time getting back in the groove of keeping track. But number 1 is Purple Bookworm did a very comprehensive video on Ursula K. Le Guin's fiction bibliography, and I thought that was fantastic. Like, I haven't even read Le Guin's whole backlist, and every time I feel like I know every book at least, or maybe have every book, I discover there are more out there. So this was a great, really comprehensive look and analysis of the works that she wrote in fiction. The other one is a really fun intro to how to get into comic book reading and how to discover comic books from Books and Bow, one of my absolute favorite channels that I watch every single video from. So if you have any interest in discovering what comic books are out there and how to start looking into comics, that is a great video to check out. So those are my 2 recommendations for the week. Thank you so very much for watching and sticking with me through this very rambly video.
I'm on that intermittent fasting thing.